Welcome to a peaceful journey into the magical world of Greek mythology. With soothing bedtime together, we're about to step into an ancient world where gods, heroes, and wondrous stories are waiting to be discovered. Poseidon, the lord of the seas, is one of the most famous and revered Olympian gods. This god is also known by the name of Neptune, his Latin name in Rome, after the Titanomachy. The major battle between gods and titans, the world was shared between the three major Olympian gods by lottery. Poseidon was given the domain of the seas, a domain that had been controlled by the ancient deities. Nereus and Ocean Dot, although he had a seat on the Olympian Council of Gods, Poseidon preferred to live in his underwater palace. The god carried his trident at all times, a weapon that allowed him to generate earthquakes and create fountains and springs. His weapon was forged by the Cyclops during the war against the Titans and became one of the god's symbols. The god of the seas paraded on the water in his chariot, drawn by dazzling animals. Behind him, a large procession of marine creatures and minor deities followed. Albeit a sea deity, the powers of Poseidon extended beyond his domain. He was also the lord of earthquakes, and the earth often trembled when the god experienced wrathful moments. Therefore, although they were far from the sea, the Greek cities in the interior were not safe from Poseidon's influence. They could endure his earthquakes, but also severe droughts. When a spring of water dried, the region interpreted it as a sign that they were no longer positively seen by Poseidon. The god of the seas was quite moody. Therefore, those who depended on the sea for their own livelihoods, such as sailors and fishermen, offered him plenty of things and sacrifices so that they could sail safely in his waters, ensuring a safe return back to their families. But such sacrifices did not mean that their wishes were attended. After all, when the god was furious, he made no distinction between those who were devoted to him and those who weren't. All those who dared to enter his domains while the god was experiencing a frivolous moment ran the risk of being swallowed by the sea. Zeus, noticing his brother's instability was an obstacle to the natural ordering of things, decided that he needed a wife. Poseidon then joined Nereid, Amphitrite, who would become the queen of the seas. Conquering his wife was not easy, but Poseidon had the priceless help of the dolphin Delphinus, who persuaded Amphitrite to marry his master. With his wife, Poseidon had his son and heir Triton. Like Zeus, Poseidon also had several extramarital affairs, but much to the luck of her bastard children and her lovers, Amphitrite, although jealous, was not as vindictive as Hera. The wife of Zeus Dot, in addition to Triton, the god had several noteworthy sons. With Medusa, he had Pegasus and the giant Chrysaor, and also the famous hero. The god also gave rise to a new breed of Cyclops, including the most famous, Polyphemus, whose only eye was pierced by Odysseus. Due to that, the god persecuted the king of Ithaca and the hero of the Trojan War, preventing Odysseus from returning home after the war. Poseidon is also known for his rivalry with his niece, the goddess Athena. The conflicts between the god and goddess grew in size due to the dispute between Athena and Poseidon to decide who would be the god revered in the capital of the region of Attica. Athena was the winner, a decision made by the gods. The city became known by the name of Athens. In a different episode, Poseidon possessed Medusa inside the temple consecrated to Athena. The young woman was one of the temple priestesses and was punished for tarnishing the sacred ground. Medusa, once a beautiful young woman, was transformed into the creature we know today. Poseidon had a major role in the rebellion against Zeus. When, together with Apollo, he imprisoned the great god, the coup failed, and both Poseidon and Apollo were punished. The two were forced to edify the grandiose walls of Troy. But due to the ingratitude shown by King Laomedon of Troy, who refused to compensate him for his work, the god cultivated hatred for his offspring. And so, the god favored the Greeks during the Trojan War. The Isthmian Games were held in Corinth, something similar to the Olympic Games, but dedicated to god Poseidon. Also in Corinth, there are reports of the existence of a huge bronze colossus which honored the Lord of the Seas in this day and age. Poseidon may not be revered as he once was, but he is undeniably one of the most renowned gods in Greek mythology. The god Dionysius, also known as Bacchus by the Romans, was the last god to join Olympus. Dionysius is regarded as the god of wine and ecstasy, but he is also associated with crops and fertility. The god's origin distinguishes him from all other Olympian deities. Dionysius was born from Zeus's union with a mere mortal named Semele. Zeus and Semele lived a great and passionate affair, but that enraged Hera, the wife of Zeus. The Olympian queen conspired to destroy her rival, and disguised as Semele's maid, she convinced the girl to ask Zeus to present himself in his full splendor. The goddess knew that the great god's intense glow would be something no mortal could withstand, and Semele was turned into ashes. However, Hera did not know that Semele was pregnant, and the fruit of that divine union was hidden among the ashes. Dionysius was not yet ready to be born. Therefore, Zeus opened his thigh and continued with a pregnancy, the child who someday would take his place at Olympus. The young Dionysius did not experience an easy life. From his early childhood, the god had to endure Hera's maltreatment. The goddess struck the young deity with madness, and he wandered the world aimlessly until he was cured by the goddess Rhea, also known as Sibylle, his grandmother, the wise. Silenus was his guardian, who always stood next to Dionysus, riding on his distinctive mule. The god was responsible for the invention of wine and shared his discovery with humanity. Dionysus taught men how to cultivate grapes and also the fermentation process required for wine production, which started to be considered a pleasant drink. In his wanderings, the god visited Greece, Egypt, and then reached India. Wherever he went, he spread his knowledge and started to gain followers. A major procession followed Dionysus wherever he went, with nymphs, satyrs, and bacchantes, who were his priestesses. Dionysus paraded in his panther-drawn carriage. As a young man, Dionysus was abducted by pirates, who believed that due to his immense beauty, he could only be the son of a king. Dionysus warned the pirates of his real identity, but they did not believe him and could only imagine the ransom they would get from him as punishment. Dionysus turned the pirates into porpoises, which are a kind of dolphin. As his symbols, Dionysus had vine branches, grapes, and a thyrsus, which is a stick with a pine cone at the tip. After wandering the world, the god returned to Greece. On the island of Naxos, he encountered the beautiful princess Ariadne, who had been abandoned by Theseus. Dionysus would take Ariadne as his wife and would have several descendants with her. During his travels on Greek soil, Dionysus was acknowledged as a deity, and several temples were edified in his honor. But his cult was still quite bizarre, for most Greeks saw the growing of his cult encountered great resistance. Nevertheless, his cult was successfully established among the Hellenic cities. Dionysus only ascended to the heavens, occupying a seat alongside other Olympian gods, when his cult established itself in Greece. The kind goddess Hestia gave her place in the council of the 12 Olympian gods. The goddess was tired of the constant fight between the gods, already as an Olympian god. Dionysus descended into the underworld, where he convinced Queen Persephone to free her mother's soul, Semele. Semele then inhabited the temple of Artemis, adopting the name of Thyone. The cult of the god Dionysus was filled with dance, and people used alcohol to let themselves go. Masks were traditionally used during these celebrations, and the recreation of mythical events were the roots of Greek theater. The Greeks started to regard Dionysus as the protector of the fine arts, and the actors and authors of plays paid him special reverence. The renowned theater of Dionysus is found next to the Athenian Acropolis, where the classic plays of Euripides, Aeschylus, and Sophocles were shown to the world. In ancient Rome, Dionysus was venerated as Bacchus. There, the god of wine and ecstasy was honored in festivities known as Bacchanals. Dionysus may have been the last god to join Olympus. But, nevertheless, the god of wine managed to exert a strong influence on the Greco-Roman culture. And, unsurprisingly, Dionysus is still one of the most appreciated gods by those who are fond of the Greek gods. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, is one of the most well-known deities in Greek mythology. The origins of the goddess are quite unusual. Zeus had swallowed his wife Metis when she was pregnant with Athena. Due to a prophecy that revealed Metis would have a son and a daughter with Zeus, the daughter would be a remarkable deity, but the son would be so powerful that he would dethrone Zeus. Zeus started to endure terrible headaches and asked to have his head opened. The goddess Athena emerged from that crack, already armed and fully developed. Zeus was marveled by the daughter he had conceived, and Athena became his favorite daughter. Athena, although shy, was one of the most beautiful Olympian goddesses, but she opted not to surrender herself to the influences of the goddess of love and remained a virgin for all eternity. The goddess had an unattainable intelligence and was consulted by other deities when they needed a solution to their issues. But her intelligence is not her only attribute worthy of reverence. Her courage is also unshakable. According to some myths, she was the only goddess who had the bravery to stand beside her father in the quarrel against the mighty monster Typhon. All the other gods found refuge in Egypt due to her sharp mind and bravery. She was considered the goddess of strategic warfare. Those who fought using their intelligence were blessed by the goddess, whereas those who relied on brute force and cruelty were favored by Ares. Another warrior deity, the goddess favored the Greeks during the Trojan War. She protected and inspired the warriors Diomedes and Achilles, but was particularly fond of the sagacious Odysseus. Athena stood by the warrior during the war and protected the hero and his family until the warrior returned to his home in Ithaca. The city of Athens was consecrated in honor of the goddess after a clash with Poseidon, to have the inhabitants of Attica on her side. The goddess offered them an olive tree, a plant that would later become one of the symbols of the goddess. That episode augmented the rivalry between Athena and Poseidon. The god of the seas raped Medusa in the temple of Athena. She was a priestess of the goddess, and Athena showed no mercy for Medusa, and she became the creature we know today. Athena is also known as the goddess of weavers, an activity widely common among women in ancient Greece. In a famous myth, a mortal known as Arachne dared to say that her embroidery was superior to that of the goddess herself. Athena and Arachne competed to know who was the best. According to some versions, Arachne won the quest, but for her boldness to challenge. A goddess, she was punished by Athena and turned into a spider. Asterisk, the goddess took part in the myths of well-known heroes. She was the one who gave Perseus the shield he would use to behead Medusa. Athena also helped the hero Bellerophon in his effort to tame the winged horse Pegasus, and also aided Hercules in his famous labors. The goddess also had an important role in the myth of the Oresteia, a work that covers the story of Orestes, son of Agamemnon. The youngster was pursued by the Furies for having killed his mother. Orestes was tried, and half of the jurors found him innocent because his mother was responsible for the death of Orestes' father. The other half did not consider that enough to mitigate the young man's crime. Athena, presiding over the trial, had the casting vote. She acquitted Orestes, and from that day on, the deciding vote came to be known as the Minerva vote, given that Minerva was the goddess's name in Rome. The famous Parthenon is found in the Acropolis of Athens, one of the world's most visited tourist spots. A massive temple built to honor the goddess who is the patroness of the city. The owl is the animal consecrated to the goddess, and because of that, the bird is a symbol of wisdom. The goddess's symbol could also be found on the shields of the Athenian warriors. The aegis is another symbol of Athena, which once belonged to Zeus and to which the head of Medusa was attached. As Zeus' favorite daughter, many referred to her as his successor. She had inherited her mother's wisdom and a sense of righteousness and order from her father. Athena is a decisive figure in Greek mythology. The courage and wisdom shown by the goddess made it possible for several characters to achieve remarkable feats, and thanks to Athena, their names will echo through eternity. Demeter is the goddess of the harvest in Greek mythology. She was part of the first generation of Olympian gods, the sons and daughters of the Titans, Kronos and Rhea. Among all the Olympian gods, Demeter and Hestia were considered the kindest and most benevolent goddesses, as the goddess of soil fertility. She was particularly worshipped by farmers. Without her blessings, the land would be as barren as the desert. Demeter particularly favored those who produced grain, whose wheat was consecrated to the goddess. The year of wheat is one of her symbols. Fruits and cereals were offered on the altars where sacrifices were made in her honor. Demeter had some children. One is Pluto, the god of abundance. The goddess was chased by Poseidon, who wished to be with her. The goddess became a mare in an attempt to dodge the god, but Poseidon turned himself into a stallion and possessed the goddess. From this union, the legendary black horse Orion was born, as well as Despoina, the goddess of winter. But the most famous descendant of Demeter is Persephone, the fruit of the union between her and Zeus. Persephone, the goddess of spring, was Demeter's favorite daughter. When Hades, the lord of the underworld, abducted Persephone, Demeter wandered the world looking for her beloved daughter. The goddess started to neglect her task. The soil became infertile, and the world was desolated by winter. After finding out that she had been abducted by the god of the underworld, the goddess threatened to make the world infertile forever if her daughter were not to return. But the bond between Hades and Persephone could no longer be broken, with the gods intervening. It was agreed that Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades and part with Demeter. Whenever Persephone re-encountered her mother, the flowers started to grow and the soil became fertile. But when she returned to Hades, her mother fell into dismay, and the world became cold and barren again. This well-known myth was used by the Greeks to explain the seasons and the Eleusinian mysteries, ancient rites of initiation symbolizing the endless cycles of death and rebirth. The goddess is also quite important in the story of Erysichthon, the man who dared to cut down the goddess's consecrated forest. He was cursed for his acts. Demeter forced that man, who boasted an unreasonable ambition, to be consumed by an endless hunger. This condition would eventually lead to his ruin. The goddess of agriculture was venerated throughout Greece, since, according to the myths, she was the one who taught men to sow and cultivate. So they learned to settle, abandoning their nomadic origins. For this reason, Demeter had a decisive role in the appearance of the first cities in the arts. The goddess is often depicted holding ears of wheat and narcissus. In Rome, Demeter was known as Cereals, the goddess of cereals. The goddess Demeter had an important role in the unfurling of Greek society, and her benevolence towards humanity made her one of the most beloved goddesses in Greek mythology. Hermes is the messenger of the gods of Olympus. He carries the messages of the gods throughout the universe. With his winged sandals, he crosses the skies at incredible speed. This god can get anywhere. Hermes can dive into the depths of the ocean and even into the world of the dead. He is the son of Zeus's relationship with Maia, daughter of the Titan Atlas. Immediately after his birth, he ventured around the world with his playful spirit. Still a baby, Hermes could barely walk when he stole Apollo's oxen. The brilliant god sought out who had stolen his cattle and was surprised to find a prodigious child. Hermes and Apollo became great friends. The messenger god offered a lyre to Apollo, which would become one of the symbols of the god of music. In return, the god of light offered Hermes his famous caduceus. With his caduceus, Hermes guided the souls of the deceased towards the kingdom of Hades. The god became one of the main Olympian gods. He came to be considered the god of cunning, of travelers, of traders, and of thieves as well. The myths with Hermes are endless. In many, the god assumes the role of a guide, since he is famous for knowing the best way to get to any destination. Hermes guided Perseus on his quest for Medusa. In other myths, the god guided some characters into the world of the dead. He took Demeter to her daughter Persephone, who had been kidnapped by Hades. Hermes also guided Orpheus in his search for Eurydice. Asterisk on the edges of Greek roads. It was common to find totems and statues in tribute to the god of travelers and merchants. These people sought to have a safe journey to their destination. The god of merchants was asked to protect those who wanted prosperity in their businesses. Therefore, the caduceus became an international symbol of trade. Hermes was also a brave god. He faced giants during the Gigantomachy, exterminated Argasta. Dangerous 100-eyed guardian Nand rescued Ares, who had been arrested by the Elode. He also freed Zeus. He became one of Zeus' favorite sons. Next to Athena, the supreme god designated him as his herald. Hermes had several children with many of his lovers. One of the most famous is his son with Aphrodite, known as Hermaphrodite. He had a double nature because he gathered in one body. The feminine and masculine characteristics with his enormous physical vigor. Hermes was one of the most worshipped gods by the athletes of antiquity. It was almost mandatory to have a statue of the god in the Greek gymnasiums. In ancient Rome, the god was known as Mercury. But because of his cunning and tricks, the god was also worshipped by crooks and thieves who counted on his help to succeed in their efforts. Hermes is also considered the god of writing and eloquence. Therefore, in Greek-Egyptian syncretism, he is associated with the god Thoth, Egyptian god who invented writing and was the patron of scribes. The god is usually represented as humorous, but no one wanted to see him angry. When Zeus and Hera were about to be married, Hermes received the mission to deliver the invitations. The lazy nymph Colony did not attend the wedding because of her indolence and laziness. But Zeus reprimanded Hermes, since the supreme god believed that Hermes had failed in his mission of delivering all the invitations. Furious, Hermes punished the indolent nymph by turning her into a turtle. The god of speed inspired the creation of pop characters like Flash in DC Comics and Quicksilver in Marvel. With his many attributes and various myths, Hermes is one of the most recognized figures in Greek mythology. Asterisk, Aphrodite is the goddess of beauty and love in New Greek mythology. In Rome, the goddess was known as Venus. Studies indicate that the cult of Aphrodite was imported from distant lands. The goddess was originally of Asian origin. There are some different versions of the origin of the goddess. In the best known, Aphrodite rose from the foam created after the fall of Uranus's testicles, which had been thrown into the sea after the castration of the sky god by his son, Kronos. The goddess emerged from the waters on a shell and was led by Zephyrus, the west wind, to a beach on the island of Cyprus. But according to Homer's version, the goddess was Zeus's daughter. Aphrodite personifies charm, sensuality, and the ideal of feminine beauty. At Zeus's behest, she married Hephaestus, the god of forges. But the goddess was not known for her fidelity. She had countless lovers. The most famous was Ares, the god of war. From this union was born Eros, also known as Cupid. Hephaestus was alerted to his wife's betrayal with the god of war. The god of forges set a trap to catch them. Ares and Aphrodite were unmasked in front. Of all the other gods, Hephaestus demanded punishment for the couple, but he ended up being mocked by the other gods. The goddess of beauty once fell hopelessly in love with a young mortal. His name was Adonis, but the love between the young man and the goddess was interrupted by the tragic death of the boy during a hunting session in the underworld. Queen Persephone also fell in love with Adonis. This generated a dispute between the two goddesses. To solve this conflict, they decided the young man would spend part of the year with each of them. The goddess Hera, wife of Zeus, was one of Aphrodite's biggest rivals. The Olympian queen hated Aphrodite and her son Eros because they were responsible for the countless times that Zeus fell in love with other women. The rivalry between the goddesses increased when the Trojan shepherd Paris elected Aphrodite as the most beautiful of all goddesses, to the detriment of Athena and Hera. Aphrodite had promised Paris the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Queen Helen of Sparta. Helen's kidnapping was the spark that started the Trojan War. Aphrodite took the side of the Trojans, protecting Paris and her son Aeneas, who fought the bravest Greek heroes. The apple was a fruit consecrated to the goddess of beauty, since the golden apple was handed over to the most beautiful of goddesses. The goddess of love was worshipped throughout the Greek world, but her main places of worship were Cyprus, her homeland, the island of Kythera, and Corinth, where her priestesses were courtesans. Aphrodite was one of the most depicted deities in the arts. From classical antiquity to the present day, it is common to find the goddess in contemporary artistic expressions. But her most famous artistic representation is the beautiful statue of Venus de Milo. Displayed in the Louvre Museum, the painting The Birth of Venus is one of Botticelli's masterpieces. Being a vain goddess, one of Aphrodite's symbols is the mirror. It also represents the female sex in opposition to the spear and shield of Ares, which represent the male sex, like the goddess Venus. Aphrodite was especially revered in Rome. After all, she was the mother of the great hero Aeneas, one of the founding fathers of Rome. Figures like Julius Caesar and Nero claim to have the goddess as their ancestor. This gave special prestige to their family genealogy, due to her charm and seductive power. It is almost impossible not to feel attracted and fascinated by the goddess of beauty and love. Hades, the lord of the underworld, alongside Poseidon and Zeus, forms the trinity of the great Olympian gods. In ancient Rome, this god is known as Pluto. His Roman name refers to god of wealth. As the ruler of the underworld, also guards all the treasures buried under the earth, gold, silver, and gems, which made Hades the richest of all. God, his name, Hades, means the one who cannot be seen. When he fought alongside the Olympian gods against the Titans, he was presented with the helm of darkness by the Cyclops. This artifact had the power of invisibility. Hades used his helmet to infiltrate enemy ranks and deceptively attack the Titan army. After their victory, Hades and his brothers divided the world. He reigned over the underworld, where the souls of the dead were welcomed for their final rest or eternal punishment. Hades was always quite dedicated to his work. That is why the god rarely visited the surface, though he had a seat on the council of the gods at Olympus. That seat was often empty in one of his few visits to the world of men. Hades, from the top of his chariot, pulled by powerful black horses, abducted Persephone, the goddess of spring, and took her to his underground palace. The young goddess was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and fertility of the soil. Hades offered pomegranate seeds to his beloved, and after accepting them, Persephone established an indissoluble bond with her new husband. Demeter could not cope with the loss of her daughter and threatened to make the earth barren and frozen forever. With such a threat, it was agreed to share Persephone's time. She would stay part of the year with her husband and return to her mother during the other part. This myth explained the origin of the seasons, given that while Persephone was with her husband, the goddess Demeter neglected her tasks, unbridling autumn and winter. When mother and daughter were reunited, flowers emerged again, indicating the arrival of spring. Persephone became the queen of the underworld, and together with her husband the couple would forever reign over the dead. Hades was helped by several other deities in his task of ruling the underworld. The judges of death, Minos, Copodan, and Rhadamanthus, who arbitrated the souls of the recently dead. The Erinyes, who were helpful in punishing criminals. Among other deities, Hades seldom interfered with the world of men or with Olympian affairs. One of the few times that Hades turned his attention to the surface was when King Sisyphus of Corinth cheated death with his cunning moves. Thanatos, the god of death, was imprisoned by the king, and then no one died. With Hades no longer receiving newcomers, the god of the underworld was also deceived by the cunning mortal. But despite his astuteness, Sisyphus failed to deceive the gods forever, and for his crimes, he was condemned to a terrible punishment in Tartarus, which would last for eternity, in one of his rare visits to Olympus. Hades was wounded by Hercules and traveled to the gods' dwelling in search of nectar and ambrosia to heal his wound. The god is often depicted with a serious semblance, holding his fork in the company of Cerberus, the hell dog, whose function is to defend the entrance of his master's kingdom. In ancient times, the god was treated with the utmost respect. The Greeks avoided pronouncing his name, and when they made sacrifices, they tried not to look at the altar, since they wanted to postpone the inevitable encounter with the god as long as possible. But the god was merciless with those who committed dreadful sins. They were thrown into Tartarus and endured terrible torments. Hades is not known for his marital infidelity, contrary to Zeus and Poseidon, but he is no saint as well. The god even had affairs with some nymphs. The most famous was the beautiful and proud nymph Mintha. She fueled the rage of Demeter and Persephone and was turned into the plant that shares her name. The god had a small offspring, among whom Macaria was the most famous, the goddess of blessed death. Those who love mythology are particularly interested in Hades, for he is a source of fear and fascination that traditionally belonged to the Titan Helios. The god is also known as an exceptional archer, and when he reached maturity, he set out in search of vengeance against the serpent Python, who persecuted his mother at Hera's behest. At a time when the god and his sister were only babies, Apollo faced the terrible serpent and struck it with his arrows. In the place where the beast fell, the temple of Apollo was built in Delphi. There, the priestesses of Apollo, known as Pythias, performed their prophetic rituals under the influence of Apollo, the god of prophecy. Delphi became a place of pilgrimage. Many wanted to ask the oracle of Apollo for advice. The Pythian Games also took place in Delphi, similar to the Olympic Games, dedicated to the god Apollo. is a deity associated with medicine. His son, Asclepius, became such a skillful healer that, through his healing arts, he was able to cheat death. But Apollo also has a sinister side. The god is associated with plagues and epidemics. During the Trojan War, he cast a pestilence upon the Greeks, for they had disrespected one of his priests, who wished to pay the ransom for his captured daughter. The Trojan War, Apollo supported the Trojans, and it was this that allowed Paris to shoot an arrow into Achilles' heel, his only weak point. In Rome, the god was known as Phoebus, the Brilliant, where he was also much worshipped, Apollo as the god of prophecy, used his powers as a link between men and gods. Through his oracles, the god revealed the will of Zeus, and also the destiny traced by the Moirai. When Apollo cast his light on something, any lie was undone, revealing only the purest truth. The god associated himself with the search for truth and rationality. Therefore, he was honored by the ancient philosophers. The importance of the god Apollo made his cult last for centuries, even after the adoption of Christianity by the Roman Empire. Although he is no longer worshipped, Apollo continues to be referenced by painters, sculptors, and poets who pay their respects to the god considered the patron of the arts. Zeus is the supreme god of Greek mythology. On his throne, on Mount Olympus, he reigns over the universe. He is the son of the Titans, Cronus and Rhea. His father was the god who reigned before the birth of Zeus. A prophecy foresaw that one of the sons of Cronus would be more powerful than the father and dethrone him. To avoid this fate, Cronus devoured his children after birth, but Zeus managed to escape. His mother deceived Cronus and caused the Titan to swallow a stone instead of the baby. Zeus was secretly raised and breastfed by Amalthea. As an adult, he challenged his father and freed his brothers, who were imprisoned in Cronus's stomach. A great war between gods and titans broke out in a conflict that became known as the Titanomachy. After the victory over the Titans, Zeus shared power with his brothers. Poseidon reigned over the seas, Hades ruled the underworld, and Zeus commanded the heavens and the earth. But before consolidating his power, he faced and defeated the giants. In the Gigantomachy, Zeus also had a final challenge to face the powerful monster Typhon. He was defeated in their first fight, but avenging himself, Zeus managed to defeat and imprison Typhon on Mount Etna as Lord of the universe. Zeus worked to establish order and justice in the world. He was associated with the duty of hospitality. The good hosts left Zeus very pleased and could be favored by him. But those who disrespected that duty could be seriously punished by Zeus. The god had several powers. Among them, the ability to control the rains and storms. Using his lightning and thunder, he showcased his power. Zeus was also able to decide the course of a battle. Whoever was favored by the god was certainly victorious. Therefore, he is often represented with Nike, the goddess of victory, in his hand. The sovereign of the universe was married to the goddess Hera, with the queen. He had important children like Hephaestus, the god of forges, and Mars, the god of war. But Zeus had many other loves besides Hera. He fell in love with several other goddesses, nymphs, and beautiful mortals. He had a vast and glorious offspring. With the goddess Leto, he had the Olympic gods Apollo and Artemis. With the mortal Semele, he had Dionysius, god of wine and ecstasy. Zeus was also the father of famous demigods such as Hercules and Perseus. But among all his children, Athena, the goddess of wisdom who was born out of Zeus's head, was his favorite. His wife was deeply jealous, and to escape her vigilance, Zeus took several different forms. He became a bull to get involved with beautiful Europa, a swan to seduce Leda, and a cuckoo to conquer Hera. Once, the gods of Olympus revolted against Zeus and imprisoned him. But with the help of Briareus, the giant hecatontures, he managed to escape and put an end to the rebellion. Zeus was venerated throughout the Greek world. One of the temples built in his honor was in Olympia. Inside, there was an enormous statue of the god sculpted by Phidias, the most renowned sculptor of ancient Greece. His work became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Olympic Games, held in the city of Olympia, were a great celebration in honor of Zeus. In the arts, the god is represented as a mature, strong, and majestic man with a crown of oak leaves, accompanied by an eagle, the animal associated with him. In Rome, the god became known as Jupiter. He was also venerated there, and his main temple was on Capitoline Hill. The most powerful of the Olympic gods was worshipped throughout Europe due to the achievements of the Roman legions. The conquered peoples sometimes assimilated the worship of the god in syncretism with their native deities. The cult of the Olympic gods may have declined, but the various myths of Zeus continue to marvel people of all ages. Hera is the renowned queen of Olympus. Sitting behind her husband Zeus, the supreme god of the universe, she reigns over the skies from the top of her golden throne. The goddess is the daughter of the Titan Cronus, the ancient supreme god, and the Titaness Rhea. Like most of her siblings, she too was swallowed by her father when he feared being dethroned by them. Hera was liberated by Zeus from her father's stomach. According to some accounts, the goddess lived on the island of Euboea, where she stayed under the watchful eye of Tethys and had the seasons as her chaperones. She is described as the most beautiful among all goddesses. And for this reason alone, Zeus fell in love with her. Hera resisted Zeus' intentions, but he resorted to many tricks to seduce her. Eventually, the goddess was fooled by one of Zeus's many booby traps. He turned himself into a cuckoo to conquer her. Hera then reigned beside Zeus. According to some poets, she received the highest honors, as her prestige was second only to Zeus himself. The goddess became associated with marriage and motherhood and was regarded as the protector of wives. With her husband, Hera had an illustrious offspring, such as Ares, the god of war, Hebe, the goddess of youth and cupbearer of Olympus, Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, and Hephaestus, the god of forges. According to some versions, Hera may have given birth to Hephaestus without Zeus, but upon seeing that she had created an imperfect son, she blamed him and threw him from the top of Olympus. The reconciliation between mother and son took place later. He gave her a beautiful golden throne. The goddess sat on it, but when she tried to get up, she realized she was stuck. Hera was only able to free herself after readmitting Hephaestus into Olympus. The Queen of the Skies is a deity associated with faithfulness, but her husband is exactly the opposite. Zeus had endless extramarital relationships, each of which enraged his wife. Zeus's lovers became targets of Hera's wrath, and many suffered dreadful reprisals. The children born of these forbidden unions were also persecuted by the goddess. Hercules is undoubtedly one of Zeus's most renowned bastards, certainly one of the most persecuted. The goddess forced the hero to be consumed by madness, and during his period of insanity, he ended up killing his wife and children. But Zeus's bastard sons and lovers were not the only targets of Hera's divine wrath. The goddess started to loathe the Trojans after the Trojan prince Paris chose Aphrodite as the most beautiful of the goddesses over Athena and Hera. This episode became known as the Paris trial. Retaliating, the goddess did everything in her power to harm Troy during the conflict with the Greeks. Even with Troy's destruction, Hera kept persecuting the hero Aeneas, who was heir to the Trojan tradition. He was persecuted throughout his whole journey from his escape from Troy to his arrival in the Italian peninsula. But some heroes were blessed by the goddess, the most famous of them being Jason. Hera protected and inspired the hero in his quest for the Golden Fleece. At one point, Zeus's never-ending array of affairs put an end to her wise patience, and Hera orchestrated a rebellion in Olympus against Zeus. The attempted coup failed, and the goddess was punished and imprisoned. Zeus only freed her after making her swear that she would never rebel again. In ancient Greece, Hera was one of the most worshipped goddesses. Her temples were scattered throughout the whole Greek world. Married and pregnant women were especially devoted to her. Together with Hestia, Hera was always part of domestic cults. The cow and the peacock are two consecrated animals in honor of this goddess. The exuberant bird has, in the feathers of its tail, the eyes of Argos, who was Hera's loyal footman, killed in service while conducting a mission on behalf of his goddess. The Queen of the Skies is identified by the name of Juno in Roman mythology. In it, she was revered alongside her husband, Jupiter. The goddess Hera is admired and hated by men who cannot tolerate her revengeful temperament. But no one is indifferent to her, which makes her one of the most important goddesses of Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, Eros is the god of love and passion. He is usually represented as a handsome winged young man with his famous bow. He is also well known as Cupid, his Latin name in Rome. The Romans represented the god of love in a more infantilized way. And in many of the artistic representations, Eros had an angelic form. But this god has no traits of a saint. He embodies desire and lust. Eros instilled love and passion in people's hearts. Under the influence of Eros, they were capable of self-sacrificing actions inconceivable to those who did not have a heart dominated by this feeling. There are two famous versions behind the origin of Eros in the best-known version. He is the son of Aphrodite, another deity linked to love, and of Ares, the god of war. But according to Hesiod, Eros was a primordial god, born out of chaos. Without the influence of Eros, all creation is compromised, since it is his power that unites the various elements, and these unions are necessary to foster life. Love is the driving force behind the creation and preservation of life in the universe. But Eros's fame comes from the myths, legends, and parables in which he is Aphrodite's son or assistant. Eros and Aphrodite were responsible for spreading love and desire throughout the world with his bow. Eros hit the hearts of his victims with golden arrows. The people affected fell in love immediately. Even the gods were not safe from Eros's archery. Apollo, also an archer god, mocked the way Eros handled the bow. But Apollo didn't get away with it. Eros struck Apollo's heart, and he fell in love with the nymph Daphne. But the story didn't stop there. Eros struck the nymph's heart with one of his lead arrows. These arrows provoke absolute repudiation in her. Apollo chased Daphne, and she rejected him. To escape the god's onslaught, the nymph was turned into a laurel by her father. Apollo and Eros never had a relationship, and despite being the most beautiful of gods, Apollo had no luck in love. The brilliant god designated Eros as the cruelest of all gods. For him, there was no greater pain than the pain of a broken heart. Eros was a bellicose god. He didn't distinguish between his targets, young and old, beautiful and ugly, rich and poor. All could be the target of the god of love. Sometimes he would even blindfold himself and shoot his arrows at random for pure fun. But in one of the stories, Eros tasted his own poison. There was a young woman considered the most beautiful of all. Some people paid her tributes that should only be paid to Aphrodite. The goddess of love asked her son to make the young woman fall in love as a terrible punishment. But the beauty of the young woman was so great that Eros was distracted, wounding himself with his own arrow. The myth of love between Eros and Psyche became one of the most celebrated stories of Greek mythology. Eros was often represented with torches in hand. These torches were used to ignite the hearts of lovers. Despite being one of the best-known gods and residing with his mother in Olympus, Eros is not traditionally one of the 12 great Olympian gods. In Rome, his importance as Cupid was even smaller. Even though he is not as worshipped as other Olympian gods, Eros continues to influence the world, nourishing it with the power of love. Is known as the hunter goddess in Greek mythology. This goddess has the bow and arrow as one of her symbols, her favorite weapon. Because of that, the goddess is usually depicted in the arts with her inseparable bow. The goddess of the hunt is the daughter of Zeus and his lover, Leto, and she is Apollo's twin sister. But she was born one day before her brother and actually helped her mother deliver Apollo when they were still babies. They and their mother were chased by the ignominious snake Python, but that creature was killed by Apollo when he became an adult. One of the traits of the goddess is that she is a virgin deity. From an early age, the goddess made a vow of chastity after witnessing all the suffering her mother had endured to bring Apollo into the world, and she remained pure for all eternity. For having helped her mother in childbirth, women in ancient Greece prayed that the goddess would help them during labor. Although she was born in Delos, the sacred island of the twin gods, Artemis dwells in the forests and mountains of Arcadia. Artemis was regarded as the goddess of wildlife. She was truly passionate about the art of hunting and wandered through the woods in search of the most glorious prey. The goddess was followed by a procession of wild and oceanic nymphs, her companions. All her companions also had the duty to remain virgins and pure, not to smear the image and reputation of the virgin goddess one time. While the goddess and her nymphs were bathing in a fountain, they were spotted by the hunter Actaeon. He was dazzled by the divine beauty of the goddess of the hunt. But the goddess did not allow herself to be raped by the profane gaze fixated on her naked body, which no man had ever seen. The goddess turned the hunter into a deer, and then he was chased by his own hunting dogs, who caught and shattered him like a good hunter. The goddess also had her own hunting dogs, from which no prey could hide. But the animal that represented the goddess of the hunt was the deer. Artemis captured some and tied them to her carriage. Sitting on it, pulled by sacred bucks, the goddess flew through the air. Agamemnon, the great leader of the Achaeans during the Trojan War, sacrificed one of Artemis's sacred deer, and if that wasn't enough, he claimed that not even the hunter goddess could kill that animal with her accuracy. This enraged Artemis, who, as punishment, prevented the Greek army from leaving for Troy. To make great peace with the goddess, Agamemnon had to sacrifice his beloved daughter, and only after such a sacrifice did the Greeks set sail for war. The goddess's most ruthless side was also shown when Niobe proudly stated that her children were more beautiful than the descendants of the goddess Leto. Apollo and Artemis punished Nio, killing all her sons with accurate arrow strikes. According to some versions of the myth, Artemis was particularly fond of Orion, a talented and giant hunter. But Orion was killed by Artemis after a trick pulled by Apollo, who deceived the goddess, jealous of that relationship. In another version, Orion attempted to rape Artemis, and so she sent a huge scorpion to kill the giant. The goddess was also depicted as a lunar goddess, like her brother Apollo, who took Helios's place as the sun god. Artemis occupied the position of the goddess of the moon, replacing Selene. According to other versions, Artemis, Selene, and Hecate were all lunar goddesses, since each goddess represents a moon phase. Artemis is one of the most adored Greek deities. In ancient Greece, several cities were consecrated in honor of the goddess. And throughout the Hellenic world, there are countless temples edified to worship her. Nevertheless, the most famous is undoubtedly the glorious temple of Artemis in Ephesus. The great temple was so majestic that it was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In the temple of Ephesus, located in Asia Minor, the goddess was worshipped differently. There, she was seen as a goddess of fertility, and her image, with multiple breasts, symbolized her ability to raise men. The goddess was also revered in ancient Rome with her Latin name of Diana, whose main temple was on Mount Aventine. With the expansion of the Roman Empire, her cult spread throughout Europe, according to some versions of Arthurian legends. The famous Lady of the Lake descended from Diana, the goddess of the hunt in Rome. Artemis is an ambiguous goddess. Sometimes, she is generous and benevolent. However, she can also be ruthless and rancorous. This duality makes her one of the most interesting goddesses of Greek mythology. Asterisk Hestia, the goddess of fire and home protector, is an Olympian goddess, daughter of Cronus and Rhea. But she surely is the less popular deity among the 12 Olympian gods. When she was born, she was swallowed by her father alongside her siblings. Since the Titan Cronus feared that his offspring would usurp his power. After the victory of the Olympian gods over the Titans, Hestia started to be venerated as the protective goddess of homes and estates. The goddess was courted by Apollo and Poseidon, but Hestia rejected both because she had made a vow of chastity. Zeus honored the goddess, ensuring that she could stay chaste for all eternity. Hestia was a gentle and kind goddess, and therefore she did not engage in the major deity battles. Due to the goddess's mild character, there are few myths that make reference to the goddess of fireplaces, but men worshipped the goddess of sacred fire, constantly keeping a flame lit in their homes and temples. Virtually every Greek city had a sacred pyre dedicated to the goddess, in which flames burned continuously. If a group of settlers had to leave to edify a new city, they took with them a bit of the pyre's sacred fire. In Rome, the goddess's cult conquered even more prominence. There, she was known by the name of Vesta, and in her temple, the sacred flame was taken care of by 6 priestesses who were known as the Vestals. These women had to remain pure and virginal. The Vestals were elected by lot from among the young girls of Rome's noble families. The goddess Hestia was one of the 12 original Olympian deities. But with the growth of Dionysius' cult, he started to occupy the role that had previously belonged to Hestia. Nevertheless, the goddess continued to embody the flame of fireplaces, and with that, Hestia kept providing warmth, comfort, and security to people's homes. Zeus, the supreme lord of Olympus, became married to the goddess Hera. The goddess was extremely jealous of the love Zeus felt for his preferred daughter. The goddess Athena. The greatest ambition of Hera was to conceive a strong, beautiful, and powerful son who could one day replace his father, just as an old prophecy had foretold. The desire of the Queen of the Skies was heard, and she soon gave birth to a beautiful child who was named Ares. The little god grew and became increasingly stronger. But from an early age, the signs of his wrath and brutality were already perceptible. As an adult, he was offered a stunning armor and a golden helmet. He was the model of a perfect warrior. Now, Ares was the god of war, his strive for conflict, and blood horrified the other gods. Due to his violent and uncontrollable nature, some gods even feared him. And so, he had a bad reputation among the deities. During the clashes between men, he was delighted by the slaughter. He did not support one side of a quarrel just because they happened to be the fairest, the most honored, or the bravest. He tended to favor those who were the most violent and brutal. But he also helped those who honored him with proper tributes and devotions. Zeus once said, "For me, he is the most despicable of the gods who inhabit Olympus, since he solely adores contention, war, and fights." Zeus hated him so much that he even said that Ares would certainly be expelled from Olympus if he wasn't the son of Hera. Asterisk, however, Ares also had divine followers. Among them was Eris, the goddess of discord, who, with her ominous powers, sowed all sorts of disagreements and quarrels between men. The goddess carried with her the children of Limos, the goddess of starvation; Algos, the goddess of pain; Ponos, the goddess of toil; and Lydie, the goddess of oblivion, who made men forget the presence of gods. After the passage of Ares and his procession, Ceres appeared, the divinities of violent death. These drank the blood of those who died in battlefields and dragged those who deserved it directly to Tartarus. Athena, the goddess of strategic war, was the only one who strongly opposed the bloodthirsty god, defeating him several times. However, not even she was capable of detaining the god's quest for blood. Only one goddess was able to calm the violent heart of Ares. Her name was Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Hera was finally pregnant from Zeus. Cheerful, the goddess pictured how gorgeous her son would be. Her expectations were never ending, given that he would be the son of the king and queen of the skies. However, the child was born, and Hera, looking at him for the first time, was horrified. It was a furry baby of rustic traits, in a soot-coated, dark skin, and he was even uglier when he cried. The goddess, disheartened, claimed that he was not her son, and threw him from the top of Olympus into the ocean. The little god violently hit the ocean waters, but managed to survive. However, he ended up crippled and would limp for the rest of his life. Hephaestus was rescued by the ocean goddess Thetis, who quickly became fond of the child. Unlike what had happened with goddess Hera, Thetis then took him to the island of Lemnos, where he grew up playing with volcanoes. As a child, Hephaestus started to develop an unmatchable ability in the art of metallurgy. Relying on the heat of the volcanoes, he was able to create the most powerful weapons and the most beautiful jewels. The god reached adulthood and decided to return to Olympus. He had conceived a gorgeous golden throne for his true mother, the goddess Hera. She felt a shiver down her spine as soon as she witnessed the return of her horrendous son. But noticing the throne he had brought with him, she quickly forgot her discomfort. She felt extremely satisfied with the gift and was eager to try it. The throne was truly divine, as gorgeous as it was comfortable. However, when trying to get up, she found herself stuck in the throne, and nothing and no one seemed able to detach her from it. Nobody but Hephaestus knew the secret to free her. However, to release her, he demanded that his mother and the court of Olympus stop treating him with disdain and accept his return to Mount Olympus. Ashamed, the goddess accepted the demand, and so she was freed. She then started to treat him with the respect he deserved. Lastly, Hephaestus made one final request, one that shocked everyone around. He asked for permission to marry Aphrodite, the most beautiful goddess of all. Hephaestus knew he was ugly, but he also knew that any woman would hardly refuse to marry a man who could give her all the luxury and safety. Much to everyone's surprise, Aphrodite accepted the proposal of Hephaestus, and with the blessing of goddess Hera, they married. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.